Anthony Walsh never expected to come home to a surprise. As one of the city's top financial advisors, he lived by schedules and plans. His days were mapped out weeks in advance, filled with meetings, client calls, and market analysis. Surprises were for other people, not for a man who made his living predicting what would happen next. The day had started normally enough. Anthony had flown to Boston for what was supposed to be a 2-day conference on investment strategies. He'd packed his usual overnight bag, kissed his empty house goodbye. He always did this, a habit from when his parents were alive, and headed to the airport. His apartment on the Upper East Side of New York was a showplace rather than a home. 3 bedrooms, floor-to-ceiling windows, and furniture that looked like it belonged in a design magazine. Anthony rarely spent time there. Between work trips, late nights at the office, and business dinners, the apartment mostly sat empty. That's why he had hired Mrs. Lopez 6 months ago, to keep the place clean and make sure nothing fell apart while he was gone. Mrs. Lopez came 3 times a week. She was a quiet, efficient woman in her 50s who Anthony knew very little about, despite the fact that she had a key to his home and access to his most personal spaces. He knew she had moved from Colombia some years ago, that she had excellent references, and that she always left his apartment spotless. That was all he needed to know. The Boston conference was meant to run until 5 p.m. the following day, but just after lunch on the first day, Anthony received an email. The main speaker had come down with food poisoning. The second day was canceled, and attendees were offered a partial refund. Anthony sat in the hotel restaurant picking at his salad and contemplating his options. He could stay in Boston anyway. There were always clients he could visit. He could head back to the office and surprise everyone by showing up when he was supposed to be away. Or he could go home and actually spend an evening in his expensive apartment. The thought of an unplanned night at home was oddly appealing. When was the last time he'd actually cooked something in his gourmet kitchen? When had he last watched a movie on his giant TV? Anthony couldn't remember. I'm going home, he decided, pulling out his phone to book a flight. 2 hours later, he was in a taxi heading from JFK to Manhattan. The city buzzed around him, people rushing to and from work, tourists gawking at tall buildings. Anthony barely noticed any of it. His mind was already thinking about the next day's meetings, about the Westfield account that needed attention, about the quarterly reports due next week. The taxi pulled up outside his building, and Anthony paid the driver, adding his usual generous tip. The doorman did a double-take when he saw him. "Mr. Walsh, we weren't expecting you until tomorrow." "Change of plans, Ray," Anthony said, slipping him a 20. "Conference ended early." "Very good, sir. Need help with your bag?" "I've got it, thanks." The elevator ride to the 17th floor gave Anthony a moment to breathe. He loosened his tie and rolled his shoulders. Maybe he'd order some food, open a bottle of wine. Actually relax for once. The thought was almost foreign to him. When the elevator doors opened directly into his foyer, a private elevator was one of the perks he'd splurged on, Anthony was immediately struck by something unusual. Music was playing. Not loud, but definitely there. A cheerful Latin beat coming from somewhere inside his apartment. Anthony frowned. Mrs. Lopez wasn't scheduled to come today. She always came Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and this was Tuesday. Had she mixed up her days? He set down his overnight bag and moved quietly through the foyer into the main living area. The music was louder now, and he could smell something too. Something that made his stomach growl despite the mediocre lunch he'd eaten in Boston. Following his nose, Anthony made his way toward the kitchen. The door was partially open and light spilled out into the hallway. He pushed the door wider and stopped dead in his tracks. His kitchen, the pristine, barely used showcase kitchen that had been photographed for Architectural Digest last year, looked like a professional restaurant in the middle of dinner service. Every counter was covered with food in various stages of preparation. Vegetables chopped in neat piles, meat marinating in covered bowls, sauces simmering in pots that Anthony didn't even remember owning. And in the middle of it all was Mrs. Lopez, dancing slightly to the music as she stirred something that smelled absolutely heavenly. Anthony must have made a sound because she suddenly turned, spoon in hand, and let out a small shriek of surprise. "Mr. Walsh," she gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "You scared me half to death." "I'm sorry," Anthony said automatically, even though this was his kitchen, his apartment, and he was the one who should be surprised. "I didn't mean to startle you." Mrs. Lopez quickly turned down the music using a small remote on the counter. "You are supposed to be in Boston," she said, her accent thicker than usual. "Until tomorrow." The conference ended early, Anthony explained, his eyes taking in the chaos of his normally spotless kitchen. "Mrs. Lopez, what exactly is going on here?" The woman's face flushed and she set down her spoon carefully. "I can explain, Mr. Walsh." Anthony raised an eyebrow, waiting. "Tuesday is my cooking day," she said, gesturing to the array of food. "I come when you are not home and I prepare meals for the week." "Meals for whom?" Anthony asked, confused. "I never asked you to cook for me." He was rarely home to eat, and when he was, he ordered in from the restaurants nearby. Mrs. Lopez looked down at her hands. "Not for you, Mr. Walsh, for my food service." "Your food service?" Anthony echoed, stepping further into the kitchen to get a better look at everything. Now that he was paying attention, he could see that many of the dishes were being portioned into identical containers, each with a small label on top. "Yes, sir. I have a small business. I cook meals for old people in my neighborhood who cannot cook for themselves anymore, people who have no family to help them." She looked up, her expression a mixture of defiance and worry. "I know I should not use your kitchen without permission, but you are never here on Tuesdays, and my kitchen at home is very small." Anthony was speechless. This quiet, unassuming woman who had been cleaning his home for months had been running a business out of his kitchen. He should be furious. He should fire her on the spot. Instead, he found himself oddly curious. "How many people do you cook for?" he asked. Mrs. Lopez seemed surprised by the question. 12 right now. Mostly older people from my building and the one next door. They pay a small fee, just enough to cover the food and my time." "And you do this every Tuesday?" "Yes, sir. I prepare enough meals for them to have lunch and dinner for 3 days. Then on Friday I cook again for the weekend and Monday." She hesitated, then added, "I always clean everything perfectly when I am done. You never notice anything, yes?" She was right. Anthony had never noticed a thing out of place. Never had any reason to think his housekeeper was doing anything besides cleaning. "How long has this been going on?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. 4 months, Mrs. Lopez admitted. "I am sorry, Mr. Walsh. I know it was wrong to use your kitchen without asking, but you have such beautiful equipment here that nobody ever uses, and my clients, they need good food." Her voice grew more passionate as she spoke. "Many of them can only afford cheap processed food otherwise. It makes them sick. I make fresh, healthy meals that remind them of home." Anthony looked around the kitchen again, seeing it through new eyes, his expensive chef-grade stove that had barely been turned on since installation, the double ovens he'd never used, the professional stand mixer that was more of a status symbol than a tool, all of it being put to use to help people in need. "Show me," he said suddenly. "Show you what, sir?" Mrs. Lopez asked, confused. "Show me what you're cooking, how this all works." Mrs. Lopez hesitated, then nodded. She moved to the stove and lifted the lid on a large pot. "This is my grandmother's chicken soup. Very good for older people, easy to digest and full of nutrients." She moved to another pot. "Here, a vegetable stew for those who don't eat meat. And here," she pointed to several containers already filled, "brown rice with herbs. Everything simple but good quality." As she spoke, her initial nervousness faded, replaced by obvious pride in her work. She showed Anthony the meal plans she created, ensuring each client got proper nutrition throughout the week. She explained how she kept costs down by buying ingredients in bulk and making efficient use of everything. Skills she'd learned running a small restaurant back in Colombia before coming to the United States. Despite himself, Anthony was impressed. This wasn't just a woman cooking a few extra meals for neighbors. This was a well-organized operation, run with the precision of a small business. "Mrs. Lopez," he said when she finally ran out of things to show him, "I should be very angry about this." Her face fell. "I understand, sir. I will pack everything and go. You will want to fire me, of course." Anthony surprised himself with his next words. "I don't want to fire you." Mrs. Lopez looked up sharply. "No? No," Anthony confirmed, a strange new feeling stirring inside him. "Actually, I think I might have a better idea." Mrs. Lopez stared at Anthony, clearly surprised by his reaction. She had expected anger, maybe even immediate dismissal. Instead, he was looking at her meal preparation setup with something that almost resembled admiration. "You're not firing me?" she asked cautiously. Anthony shook his head slowly. No, I'm not firing you. He pulled out one of the kitchen stools and sat down, loosening his tie further. But I would like to understand exactly what's happening here. From the beginning, please. Mrs. Lopez wiped her hands on her apron and turned down the heat on several pots before sitting across from him. She seemed unsure where to start. I've been a cook my whole life, she finally said. Back in Colombia, my family had a small restaurant. Nothing fancy, but people came from all over the neighborhood for my mother's recipes. A smile crossed her face at the memory. When I came to America 15 years ago, I wanted to open my own place, but... She shrugged. Life is expensive here. I needed steady work. Anthony nodded. He understood the harsh realities of New York economics better than most. So I became a housekeeper instead. Good pay, reliable hours. She gestured around the immaculate apartment. And I'm good at it. But I miss cooking. It's in my blood, you know? Anthony didn't know. He'd never felt that kind of passion for anything outside of financial markets. But he could recognize it in others. About 6 months ago, Mrs. Lopez continued, there was an old man in my building, Mr. Chen. His wife died, and he stopped eating properly. Just sad little microwave meals or sometimes nothing at all. I started bringing him food twice a week. Simple things. Soup, rice dishes, things easy to reheat. She stood up to stir one of her pots, then continued talking over her shoulder. Then I noticed Mrs. Goldstein on the 3rd floor having the same problem, and Mr. Petrov from next door. All these elderly people living alone, not eating right because cooking for one person is hard, especially when you're old and everything hurts. Anthony watched as she expertly adjusted seasonings without measuring anything. So you started cooking for them all? As a business? Mrs. Lopez turned around, wooden spoon in hand. Not a real business at first. Just a few extra meals, a little money to cover ingredients. But then more people asked, and I needed more space than my tiny kitchen. Her eyes darted around guiltily. Your kitchen is empty every Tuesday. You're always at late meetings or traveling. I thought, just once a week, what would be the harm? Anthony looked at the containers lined up on his counter. Each one had a name neatly printed on a label, along with reheating instructions. How much do you charge them? He asked. $5 per meal, Mrs. Lopez said. Enough to cover good ingredients and a little for my time. Most of them don't have much money living on Social Security. Anthony did a quick mental calculation. 12 people, 6 meals per week, $5 each, and that's only $360 a week, he said, frowning. After paying for all the ingredients, you can't be making much. Mrs. Lopez smiled. It's not about making much money, Mr. Walsh. It's about helping people who need it. And doing what I love. The concept seemed foreign to Anthony. In his world, every decision was about maximizing return on investment. The idea of doing something primarily because it helped others was, well, not part of his usual thinking. Can I see your books? He asked suddenly. Mrs. Lopez looked confused. My books? Your records. What you spend, what you charge. I assume you keep track. She nodded and went to her large purse hanging by the door. From it, she pulled a worn notebook and handed it to Anthony. He flipped through pages of neat handwriting. Ingredients listed with prices. Weekly menus. Notes about each client's preferences and dietary restrictions. Mrs. Lopez had even calculated her cost per meal down to the penny. Anthony was surprised. This wasn't just a casual side project. She was running a real operation here. Meticulously planned and executed. The only thing missing was proper funding and space. This is impressive, he said, looking up from the notebook. You've got a real talent for organization. Mrs. Lopez looked pleased. In a kitchen, you must be organized or everything falls apart. Anthony closed the notebook, his mind working quickly. So what exactly do you need to make this work properly? Besides using someone else's kitchen without permission? He added the last part with a raised eyebrow, but there was no real anger in his voice. Mrs. Lopez thought for a moment. More space. Better storage containers. Maybe a delivery service for clients who can't walk well. She hesitated, then added, and more time. I could help more people if I had more hours to cook. Anthony stood up and walked around the kitchen, examining the various dishes in progress. The food smells amazing, he admitted. Would you like to try some? Mrs. Lopez asked, already reaching for a plate. Before Anthony could answer, she was serving him a small portion of several dishes. The chicken soup, a piece of baked fish with herbs, and some roasted vegetables. The presentation was simple but appealing. Anthony couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten a home-cooked meal. His diet consisted mainly of restaurant food, client dinners, and the occasional protein bar when he was too busy for a proper meal. He took a cautious bite of the fish. Flavors exploded in his mouth. Lemon, garlic, fresh herbs, all perfectly balanced. The vegetables were just as good, and the soup was something else entirely. Rich and comforting in a way that reminded him of childhood, though his mother had never been much of a cook. "This is incredible," he said after swallowing. "Seriously, this is better than most restaurants I go to." Mrs. Lopez beamed with pride. "Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Good ingredients, simple preparation. That's the secret." Anthony continued eating as he thought. An idea was forming in his mind, one that made a strange kind of sense. He'd been looking for something to do with his money besides just accumulating more of it. His financial advisor had suggested charitable donations for the tax benefits, but nothing had sparked his interest. Until now. "Mrs. Lopez," he said finally, setting down his fork. "I have a proposition for you." She looked wary. "What kind of proposition?" "A business one." Anthony straightened up, slipping naturally into the tone he used for client presentations. "What if, instead of sneaking into my kitchen once a week, you had a proper space to work from? A commercial kitchen with all the equipment you need?" Mrs. Lopez's eyes widened. "That would be wonderful, but impossible. Commercial kitchens in New York cost a fortune to rent." "Not if you have an investor," Anthony said. "Someone to provide startup capital." She stared at him. "You want to invest in my little food service?" Anthony nodded. "I do. I think you're onto something important here. There must be thousands of elderly people in this city struggling to eat properly. You've identified a real need and come up with a solution. That's what good business is about." "But I don't make much money," Mrs. Lopez protested. "It's mostly just to help people." "Not all investments are about immediate financial return," Anthony said, surprising himself with the words. "Sometimes they're about building something worthwhile." Mrs. Lopez looked skeptical. "And what would you want in return? Part ownership? A reasonable stake in the business, yes," Anthony replied. "But mostly I'd want to help expand what you're doing. Reach more people who need it." He paused, then added, "And maybe a home-cooked meal for myself now and then." Mrs. Lopez studied his face, perhaps looking for signs that he was mocking her, or setting her up for something. Finding none, she slowly nodded. "I would need to keep my job here," she said, "at least until the business grows enough." "Of course," Anthony agreed. "Though we might need to adjust your schedule. And obviously you'll stop using my kitchen without permission." Mrs. Lopez had the good grace to look embarrassed. "Yes, Mr. Walsh. Call me Anthony," he said. "If we're going to be business partners, we should be on a first-name basis." "Anthony," she repeated, the name sounding strange in her mouth. "And I am Rosalinda." "Not Mrs. Lopez. Rosalinda," he echoed. "Well, Rosalinda, shall we discuss the details while you finish cooking? I'm assuming these meals still need to go out today." She nodded gratefully. "Yes, they expect delivery by 6 o'clock. "Then let's talk while you work," Anthony said, rolling up his sleeves. "And maybe you can show me how to help. I've never done much cooking, but I can follow instructions." Rosalinda looked at him in surprise. This wealthy man in his expensive suit offering to help package meals for the elderly. "You want to help?" she asked incredulously. Anthony shrugged, feeling slightly embarrassed. "Why not? It's my kitchen, after all." Rosalinda smiled and handed him an apron. "First, wash your hands very well. Then you can help me fill these containers." As Anthony followed her instructions, he felt something unfamiliar, a sense of doing something immediately useful. His work in finance moved billions of dollars around the world, but the effects were abstract, visible only in spreadsheets and market reports. Here he could see exactly who would benefit from his efforts. "Tell me about the people you deliver to," he said as he carefully spooned rice into containers. "Who are they?" Rosalinda's face lit up as she began describing her clients. The retired teacher who loved spicy food, the former taxi driver who told wonderful stories about old New York, the Chinese grandmother who had given Rosalinda tips on making perfect rice. As he listened, Anthony realized he was smiling. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he wasn't thinking about the markets or his clients or his next big deal, and it felt surprisingly good. The next morning, Anthony woke up earlier than usual. He'd gone to bed with his head buzzing with ideas for Rosalinda's food service. For the first time in years, he'd been excited about something other than financial markets. He made himself a cup of coffee and sat at his rarely used dining table. Spread out in front of him were the notes he'd taken last night after helping Rosalinda deliver meals to her elderly clients. Meeting those people had been eye-opening. They lived just blocks away from his luxury building, yet existed in an entirely different world. Most were in their 70s or 80s, living alone in apartments they'd occupied for decades. They survived on fixed incomes that barely covered rent and utilities in the increasingly expensive city. But more striking than their financial situations had been their loneliness. When Rosalinda had knocked on their doors, their faces had lit up with genuine joy. They weren't just receiving food. They were receiving a few minutes of human connection. Anthony sipped his coffee, thinking about Mr. Vasquez, a retired postal worker who had insisted they come inside his tiny apartment. The old man had shown Anthony a collection of vintage stamps with the enthusiasm of someone sharing great treasures. In the financial circles Anthony usually moved in, those stamps would have been dismissed as nearly worthless. But to Mr. Vasquez, they represented a lifetime of memories. His phone buzzed with a message from his assistant reminding him of a 9 a.m. meeting. Anthony sighed. Back to reality. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed inside him. At the office, Anthony went through the motions of his usual routine. He analyzed market trends, took calls from anxious investors, and attended a strategy meeting that dragged on for hours. But his mind kept drifting back to Rosalinda's operation. During his lunch break, instead of ordering his usual salad at his desk, he shut his office door and made some calls. First to a real estate contact who specialized in commercial properties, then to a lawyer friend who handled small business formation, finally, to his accountant to discuss investment options. By 5 o'clock, Anthony had the beginnings of a plan. He left the office early, something he rarely did, and headed not to his apartment but to a small commercial space in the same neighborhood where Rosalinda's clients lived. The real estate agent, a woman named Diane who had sold Anthony his apartment years ago, was waiting outside. "This is quite different from your usual interests," she commented as she unlocked the door. "A commercial kitchen?" Anthony shrugged. "I'm exploring some new opportunities." The space was exactly what Diane had described over the phone, a former restaurant that had closed 6 months ago, with most of the kitchen equipment still intact. The dining area was small but clean, with large windows facing the street. The kitchen itself was nearly 3 times the size of Anthony's at home, with industrial-grade appliances and ample counter space. The owner's eager to rent, Diane explained as Anthony inspected the walk-in refrigerator. The previous tenant left owing 2 months' rent. He'd consider a reasonable offer, especially if you're willing to sign a longer lease. Anthony nodded, mentally calculating numbers. "Tell him I'll take it. 3-year lease to start with an option to extend." Diane raised her eyebrows. "Don't you want to think about it? Or have someone look over the equipment?" "I trust your judgment," Anthony said. "And I have someone in mind to check the equipment. Can we meet tomorrow to sign the paperwork?" As Diane locked up, she gave Anthony a curious look. "I have to ask, why a restaurant space? You've never mentioned an interest in the food industry before." Anthony smiled slightly. "Let's just say I'm investing in someone's vision." Back at his apartment, Anthony found Rosalinda finishing up her regular cleaning duties. He had texted her earlier, asking her to wait for him before leaving. "I found a space," he announced without preamble. Rosalinda looked up from organizing his mail, confusion crossing her face. "A space?" "For the kitchen," Anthony clarified. "For your food service." Her eyes widened. "Already? But we just talked about it yesterday." Anthony shrugged. "When I see a good opportunity, I move quickly. It's a former restaurant about 10 blocks from here, in the heart of the neighborhood where most of your clients live." Rosalinda sat down slowly. "This is happening very fast. Is that a problem?" Anthony asked, suddenly realizing he might be pushing too hard. In his world, decisions were made quickly, deals closed in days. But not everyone operated at that pace. Rosalinda took a deep breath. "No, not a problem, just surprising I didn't think you were serious." "I'm always serious about business," Anthony said, sitting across from her. "And this is a business proposition. I've spoken with my lawyer and my accountant. We can set up a proper company structure with both of us as partners. He pulled out his tablet and showed her photos of the space Diane had sent over. The kitchen is fully equipped, though you'll need to inspect everything to see what might need upgrading. There's a small dining area we could use for people who want to eat on site rather than take meals home. Rosalinda studied the photos, a mix of excitement and apprehension on her face. It looks wonderful, but the cost? I'll handle the startup costs, Anthony said confidently. Rent, equipment upgrades, initial inventory, marketing, whatever we need. You'll contribute your expertise, recipes, and client relationships. He slid a folder across the table to her. These are the basic terms I'm proposing. Take them home, look them over. If you want to bring in your own lawyer to review them, I'll cover that cost too. Rosalinda opened the folder hesitantly, scanning the papers inside. 60-40 split? She asked, looking up. With me as the majority owner? Anthony nodded. You're bringing the most important assets, the knowledge and the passion. I'm just providing capital. This is very generous, Rosalinda said cautiously. Why are you doing this? It was a fair question, one Anthony had been asking himself all day. Why was he, a man who measured everything by its financial return, suddenly investing in a small food service that would barely make a profit? I believe it's a viable business model with room for growth, he said, giving the answer that made sense to his logical mind. But seeing Rosalinda's skeptical expression, he added more honestly, and I think what you're doing matters. Those people we visited yesterday, they need more than just food. They need someone who cares. Rosalinda studied his face, then nodded slowly. Yes, they do. She closed the folder. I will look at these papers carefully. But I think this could be good. Anthony felt an unfamiliar sensation in his chest, something like pride, but warmer, more personal. Great, he said, suddenly awkward. Take your time. No rush. Rosalinda smiled, seeing through his attempt to seem casual. You've already signed the lease, haven't you? Anthony had the good grace to look sheepish. Not exactly, but I've agreed to terms. We sign tomorrow. She laughed, shaking her head. Rich people move so fast. Is that a yes, then? Anthony pressed. It's a let me read these papers and visit the kitchen first, Rosalinda corrected him. But probably yes. 2 days later, they stood together in their new space. The lease was signed and Anthony had transferred the first payment. Rosalinda had spent hours inspecting every piece of equipment, making lists of what worked and what needed to be replaced. The ovens are excellent, she reported, excitement making her accent stronger. And the refrigerator is much bigger than we need right now, which is good for growth. But the mixer is broken and we need better storage containers. Anthony took notes on his phone. What about staff? You can't do all this alone, especially if we're expanding. Rosalinda hesitated. I have a niece, Valentina. She just finished culinary school but can't find a good job. And my neighbor's son, David, is looking for part-time work while he finishes college. He could help with deliveries. Hire them, Anthony said immediately. Anyone else? We should start small, Rosalinda cautioned. See how many new clients sign up before hiring more people. Anthony nodded, appreciating her caution. In his eagerness, he might have rushed into hiring a full staff immediately. Rosalinda's practical approach was a good balance to his tendency to go big from the start. What about a name? He asked, looking around at the empty dining space. We need something for the sign out front. Rosalinda thought for a moment. My clients just call it Rosalinda's Food, simple. Rosalinda's Kitchen, Anthony suggested. Personal, but suggests a broader operation than just you. She smiled. I like that. They spent the rest of the afternoon planning. Anthony set up a spreadsheet on his laptop, creating projections based on Rosalinda's current client list and potential growth. Rosalinda sketched layouts for the kitchen to maximize efficiency. As evening approached, Rosalinda checked her watch. I need to go home and cook for tomorrow's deliveries. One last time in my small kitchen. Let me drive you, Anthony offered. I'd like to see where you live, get a sense of your current setup. Rosalinda looked hesitant. It's not like your place. Very simple. That's fine, Anthony assured her. I grew up in a small apartment in Queens. I haven't always lived in luxury. This seemed to surprise her. Really? I thought you were born rich. Anthony laughed. Far from it. My dad was a bus driver, my mom a school secretary. I got lucky with some investments after college, then worked my way up. The drive to Rosalinda's apartment took only 15 minutes, but it was like entering another world. The neat but aging building had no doorman, just a simple security door with buzzers. Rosalinda's apartment was on the 4th floor, reached by a narrow staircase since the elevator was out of order. "They say it will be fixed next month," she explained as they climbed. "It's been next month for almost a year now." Her apartment was small but spotlessly clean. The living area held a couch, a small TV, and a dining table covered with a bright cloth. Family photos covered the walls, children and grandchildren, Anthony assumed. The kitchen was indeed tiny, barely enough room for one person to work. Yet somehow Rosalinda had been preparing meals for 12 people in this miniature space. "You've been doing all this here?" Anthony asked, amazed. Rosalinda shrugged. "You work with what you have, that's why I started using your kitchen. Much more space." Anthony felt a new appreciation for what she'd accomplished. He'd been impressed with her operation in his kitchen, but seeing where she normally worked made her achievement even more remarkable. "You know," he said, leaning against the doorframe as Rosalinda began pulling ingredients from her small refrigerator, "I think this partnership is going to work out very well." Rosalinda looked up, a cautious smile on her face. "I hope so, Anthony. I really hope so." As he watched her efficiently organizing her cramped workspace, Anthony realized something surprising. For all his wealth and success, he had never built anything real, anything that directly helped other people. His work moved. Money around made rich people richer, including himself, but didn't actually improve lives in a tangible way. Maybe that was about to change. 2 weeks later, Anthony stood in the newly renovated kitchen of Rosalinda's kitchen, watching the organized chaos of their first official day of operation. The transformation of the space had been remarkable. Fresh paint brightened the walls, new energy-efficient lighting illuminated every corner, and Rosalinda's carefully selected equipment gleamed on the countertops. But more impressive was the team Rosalinda had assembled. Her niece Valentina moved, with the same confident grace as her aunt, managing 3 pots simultaneously while instructing David, their delivery person, on the proper way to pack the insulated bags. "The soup containers go in first at the bottom," Valentina explained. "They're the most likely to leak if tipped." David nodded seriously, following her instructions. He was a college student with a friendly face and careful hands. Exactly what they needed for someone who would be the daily point of contact with their elderly clients. Anthony checked his watch. It was 10 a.m., and he had a conference call at 11. He'd been spending more time at the kitchen than at his office lately, much to the confusion of his colleagues. He'd had to dodge questions about his new restaurant investment from several curious coworkers. "You don't have to be here every day, you know," Rosalinda said, appearing at his side with a clipboard. "This was supposed to be a financial investment for you, not a second job." Anthony smiled. "I know, but I find I enjoy seeing how things are coming together." Truthfully, he was surprised by how much he liked being in the kitchen. The sights, sounds, and smells were so different from the sterile environment of his office. Here, people created tangible things. Food that would nourish bodies, not just numbers that would grow accounts. "We have 22 clients now," Rosalinda reported, showing him the delivery schedule. 10 from my original group, plus 12 new ones who signed up after we distributed flyers at the senior centers. Anthony nodded, pleased. "That's ahead of our projections. How are the finances looking?" "We're charging $7 per meal now instead of $5, Rosalinda said. "Still very affordable, but it gives us a little more room for quality ingredients. Most clients have opted for the 5 meals per week plan." Anthony did a quick calculation. 22 clients, 5 meals per week, $7 per meal. That's $707 weekly revenue, not bad for the first month. Rosalinda looked concerned, but with rent and salaries, we're still not breaking even. "We don't need to break even yet," Anthony assured her. "The business plan accounts for 6 months of operating at a loss. By then, we should have at least 50 clients, which will put us in the black." Valentina called Rosalinda over to taste a sauce, leaving Anthony to continue observing the operation. He'd learned more in the past 2 weeks than he had in years of financial theory. Watching Rosalinda negotiate with suppliers had been a masterclass in relationship-based business practices. She didn't always go with the lowest price but considered reliability, quality, and flexibility when choosing vendors. Anthony's phone buzzed with a message from his assistant. His 11 a.m. call was being moved up to 10:30. He sighed and gathered his things. "I have to go," he told Rosalinda. "Conference call with investors." She nodded without looking up from the pot she was stirring. "Come back for lunch if you can. We're testing a new chicken dish for tomorrow's menu." Anthony smiled. "I'll try." As he headed out, he passed David, who was loading the first batch of meals for delivery. "Mr. Walsh," David called. "Mrs. Petrovich asked if you'll be coming with me today. I think she wants to show you her new cat." Anthony had accompanied David on deliveries several times, wanting to meet more of their clients and understand their needs better. Mrs. Petrovich, a lively widow in her 80s, had taken a particular liking to him. "Tell her I'll try to come tomorrow," Anthony replied. "And remind her not to give the cat any of our food. It's seasoned for humans." David grinned. "I'll tell her." The connection Anthony felt with their clients still surprised him. These were people he would never have encountered in his normal life. Yet now he found himself genuinely concerned about their well-being, remembering their stories, and even looking forward to seeing them again. Back at his office, Anthony struggled to focus on the investor call. While his colleagues discussed decimal point movements in interest rates, his mind kept drifting to the kitchen, to Rosalinda and her team, to their growing list of grateful clients. After the call, his boss stopped by his office. "Everything okay with you lately, Anthony?" he asked, closing the door behind him. "You seem distracted." Anthony straightened in his chair. "Everything's fine, just diversifying my investments a bit. This restaurant thing I keep hearing about?" His boss raised an eyebrow. "Not exactly your usual type of investment." "It's a small food service business, not a restaurant," Anthony corrected. "And sometimes it's good to try something different." His boss didn't look convinced. "Just don't let it interfere with your work here. The Franklin account needs your full attention this week." "Of course," Anthony assured him. "I'm on top of it." But as his boss left, Anthony realized something uncomfortable. For the first time in his career, his work in finance didn't feel as important as it once had. The Franklin account represented millions of dollars, but ultimately, it was just moving money from one place to another. No one's life would truly be better or worse based on his performance. At Rosalinda's kitchen, he could see the direct impact of their work every day. Anthony managed to slip away from the office at lunchtime and return to the kitchen. The morning rush was over, meals delivered, and the team was cleaning up while preparing for the next day. Just in time, Rosalinda called when she saw him. "Valentina's chicken is ready for tasting." The small dining area had been set up with a table for the staff to eat together. It was another of Rosalinda's practices that Anthony had initially found strange, but now appreciated. Everyone sat down, together for lunch, sharing the food they had prepared and discussing improvements or new ideas. "This is delicious," Anthony said after tasting Valentina's chicken dish. "The sauce has a hint of something." "Citrus?" "Orange and lime," Valentina confirmed, pleased by his observation. "With a touch of honey." "Our clients will love it," Rosalinda declared. "Especially Mr. Vasquez. He always asks for more sauce." As they ate, David shared stories from the morning deliveries. Mrs. Chen had proudly shown him her granddaughter's college acceptance letter. Mr. Goldstein had finally agreed to use a cane after a near fall last week. Little moments from their clients' lives that somehow made the meal taste better. Anthony checked his watch reluctantly. "I should get back to the office." "Before you go," Rosalinda said, "we need to talk about the community dinner idea." They had been discussing hosting a weekly dinner at the kitchen for clients who wanted to eat together, rather than alone in their apartments. The idea had come from the clients themselves, many of whom had mentioned that loneliness was as much a problem as food preparation. "What about it?" Anthony asked. "We've had 15 people sign up already," Rosalinda reported. "More than I expected. We'll need extra chairs, another table, and probably another part-time helper for those evenings." Anthony nodded. "Let's do it. The budget can handle it. and it fits perfectly with our mission." "Our mission?" Rosalinda raised an eyebrow. "I don't remember writing a mission statement." Anthony felt his face warm slightly. "Well, not officially, but providing good food and community to people who need it. That's what we're doing, right?" Rosalinda smiled. "Yes, that's what we're doing." As Anthony walked back to his office, he felt the familiar tension between his two worlds growing stronger. The world of finance, where he'd built his career and fortune, seemed increasingly distant and abstract compared to the immediate, tangible work at Rosalinda's kitchen. His phone rang. It was Diane, his real estate contact. "Anthony, I found something interesting," she said without preamble. "There's a property for sale 2 blocks from your kitchen space. It's a small residential building with 6 apartments, all currently occupied by seniors on fixed incomes. The owner is selling, and I'm concerned the new buyer will raise rents and force them out." Anthony frowned. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because 3 of the residents are your clients," Diane replied. "I recognize the address from the paperwork we filed for the kitchen, and because I thought you might be interested in expanding your investment in the community." Anthony stopped walking. "You want me to buy an apartment building?" "Just consider it," Diane said. "The price is reasonable for the area, and the building is in decent shape. It could be a smart financial move and protect your clients at the same time." After hanging up, Anthony stood on the sidewalk, people flowing around him as he thought. 6 months ago, he would have evaluated Diane's suggestion purely on its financial merits: expected return, tax implications, opportunity cost. Now he found himself thinking about the people who lived in that building. People who might lose their homes if the wrong buyer came along. People who relied on Rosalinda's meals, who had become part of this unexpected new chapter in his life. Back at his office, Anthony pulled up the financial models he'd created for Rosalinda's kitchen. They were on track for their projections, maybe even slightly ahead. The business wouldn't make him rich. In fact, his return on investment would be minimal compared to his usual standards, but it would be sustainable. And then there was this new opportunity. Buying a building wasn't part of their business plan. It would complicate things, require more capital, more attention. Anthony stared at his computer screen, then closed the financial spreadsheet. Some decisions couldn't be made with formulas alone. He picked up his phone and called Rosalinda. "I have an idea I want to discuss," he said when she answered. "It's a bit outside our original plan, but I think it might be important." "Another one of your fast ideas?" Rosalinda asked, a smile in her voice. "Yes," Anthony admitted. "But this one's bigger. Can you meet after the kitchen closes today?" As he hung up, Anthony realized something had fundamentally changed in him. For the first time in his adult life, he was making decisions based not just on financial return, but on their impact on people's lives. And strangely, it didn't feel like bad business at all. 3 months later, Anthony sat at his desk, staring at the resignation letter on his computer screen. He'd written and deleted it 5 times already. Each version felt either too formal or too personal, not quite capturing why he was leaving a successful career in finance. His office phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was his boss. "Can you come to my office?" The tone made it clear this wasn't a request. Anthony sighed, saved the draft, and headed down the hallway. He knew what this was about. His performance reviews, once consistently excellent, had been merely adequate lately. His heart wasn't in the work anymore, and it showed. His boss was waiting, a folder open on his desk. "Sit down, Anthony." Anthony took a seat, noticing the quarterly performance report spread out before him. "Your numbers are down," his boss said without preamble. "The Franklin account is underperforming, and you missed 2 client calls last week. This isn't like you." "I know," Anthony admitted. "I've been distracted by your restaurant project." It wasn't a question. "Food service," Anthony corrected automatically. "And yes, partly. It's been taking more of my time than I initially expected." His boss leaned back in his chair. "You need to make a choice, Anthony. This firm needs your full attention. Whatever this side project is, it can't interfere with your work here." Anthony nodded slowly. "You're right. I do need to make a choice." He paused, then added, "And I think I already have." His boss's expression changed as he realized what Anthony meant. "You can't be serious. You've built your career here for what? A small food business that will barely turn a profit?" Anthony smiled slightly. It's about more than profit now. Back in his office, Anthony finished the resignation letter, keeping it simple and professional. He would give 4 weeks' notice, help transition his clients to other advisors, and leave on good terms. His finger hovered over the send button for only a moment before pressing it. A wave of relief washed over him. The decision had been building for weeks, ever since he purchased the apartment building Diane had told him about. That transaction had changed everything. What had started as a small investment in Rosalinda's cooking skills had expanded into something much more meaningful. A genuine commitment to a community he'd never expected to be part of. Anthony gathered a few personal items from his desk and headed out. He'd come back tomorrow to start the transition process, but right now, there was somewhere more important to be. 30 minutes later, he walked into Rosalinda's kitchen, now a thriving operation serving over 60 clients daily. The afternoon preparation was in full swing, with Valentina and 2 new staff members chopping vegetables for tomorrow's meals. David was coordinating with a second delivery person they'd hired as their service area expanded. And in the center of it all was Rosalinda, moving from station to station, tasting, adjusting, teaching. She spotted Anthony and waved him over. "You're early," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "I thought you had meetings all afternoon." "I did," Anthony confirmed. "But I rescheduled. We need to talk about the community center idea." Rosalinda's eyes lit up. She'd been the one to suggest expanding their weekly community dinners into something bigger. After Anthony purchased the apartment building, they had discovered an unused ground floor space that had once been a small neighborhood store. Rosalinda had immediately seen its potential. "Let's talk in the office," she suggested. Their office was a small room off the kitchen that had once been a storage closet. They had fitted it with a desk, 2 chairs, and a filing cabinet. Simple, functional, and always smelling faintly of whatever was cooking that day. "I did it," Anthony said once the door was closed. "I resigned." Rosalinda's eyes widened. "From your job? The big finance position?" Anthony nodded. It was time. "I can't keep dividing my attention." "But Anthony, you love that job. It's your career." "I used to love it," he corrected. "Now I love this more." He gestured toward the kitchen beyond the door. "What we're building here matters in a way that moving money around never did." Rosalinda studied his face, perhaps looking for signs of doubt. Finding none, she nodded slowly. "So you'll be here full-time now? Working with me? If you'll have me as a proper partner, yes." Anthony pulled out his tablet and opened a document. "And I want to start with your community center idea. I've been working on some plans." He showed her the preliminary designs he'd commissioned from an architect friend. The old store space in the apartment building transformed into a bright, welcoming center with areas for meals, activities, and small events. "This is exactly what I imagined," Rosalinda breathed, taking the tablet for a closer look. "But can we afford it?" "With my full-time attention to fundraising and grants, yes," Anthony said confidently. "I've already spoken with some former clients who are interested in supporting community projects. And there are several government programs for senior services that we qualify for." Rosalinda handed back the tablet. "This is becoming much bigger than meals, isn't it?" Anthony nodded. "Is that okay with you?" "This all started with your cooking, your vision." "It's more than okay," Rosalinda assured him. "Food brings people together, but community keeps them together. This feels like the right next step." They were interrupted by a knock at the door. It was David. "Sorry to bother you, but Mrs. Petrovich is here. She says she needs to talk to both of you right away." They exchanged concerned glances. Mrs. Petrovich was one of their original clients, a spirited woman who never missed the weekly community dinners. They found her waiting in the dining area, her cane tapping impatiently against the floor. Her face brightened when she saw them. "There you are. I've been waiting to tell you my news." Despite being nearly 80, her voice carried the enthusiasm of someone decades younger. "My grandson is getting married next month, and I want you to cater the reception." Anthony blinked in surprise. "You want us to cater a wedding?" Mrs. Petrovich nodded firmly. "It will be small, just family and close friends. Maybe 50 people. But my grandson Michael said I could choose the food, and I want your cooking." She looked at Rosalinda. "No one makes stuffed cabbage like you do, dear." "It reminds me of my mother's." Rosalinda looked hesitant. "We've never catered an event like that before. Our kitchen is set up for individual meals, not large gatherings." "Nonsense," Mrs. Petrovich declared. You feed 60 people every day. What's 50 more at once? And Michael will pay properly, I made sure of that. After Mrs. Petrovich left with their tentative agreement to consider her request, Anthony and Rosalinda looked at each other. A wedding? Rosalinda said doubtfully. That's very different from what we do. But not impossible, Anthony pointed out. And it could open up a new revenue stream. Small personal catering for family events. Rosalinda slowly began to nod. We would need some additional equipment. Serving dishes, portable warmers. All manageable investments if this becomes a regular part of the business. They continued discussing logistics as they walked back into the kitchen. The afternoon prep was nearly complete, and staff members were cleaning workstations. It's time for the community dinner setup, Valentina reminded them. We have 23 people coming tonight. Wednesday night community dinners had become a highlight of the week. Tables were arranged in the dining area, tablecloths and simple centerpieces laid out, and a special menu prepared. The elderly clients who attended often dressed up for the occasion, turning a basic meal into a social event many looked forward to all week. As Anthony helped arrange the tables, he thought about how much his life had changed in just a few months. He had gone from a successful but isolated finance professional to part of this vibrant community effort. He knew the names and stories of dozens of people in the neighborhood now. He had regular conversations with the local grocery store owner, the pharmacist, the librarian who helped some of their clients find large print books. The first guests began arriving at 5 o'clock. Anthony greeted each one by name, helping those with walkers or canes to their seats. Mrs. Chen brought homemade almond cookies for dessert. Mr. Vasquez wore his best suit, as he did every Wednesday. By 5:30, the room was filled with conversation and laughter. Rosalinda and her team served a hearty stew with freshly baked bread, moving efficiently between tables, stopping to chat with each guest. Anthony took a moment to stand back and observe the scene. These dinners had started as a simple idea, providing a place for lonely seniors to eat together rather than alone. They had become something much more meaningful, a true community gathering where people shared stories, formed friendships, and looked after one another. Rosalinda appeared at his side, a serving tray in her hands. "Happy?" she asked quietly. "Very," Anthony replied honestly. "You know, when I came home early that day and found you using my kitchen, I never imagined where it would lead." Rosalinda smiled. "Life's best surprises are the ones you don't plan for." "Speaking of surprises," Anthony said, "I've been thinking about our name. If we're expanding beyond just food service into a community center and occasional catering, maybe we should consider a rebrand." "What did you have in mind?" Rosalinda asked. "Something that reflects what we've really built here, not just a kitchen but a community." He hesitated, then suggested, "Maybe neighborhood hearth? A hearth is the center of a home where food is prepared and people gather." Rosalinda considered this, then nodded slowly. "I like it. From my kitchen to yours to a community hearth. It feels right." A call from one of the tables pulled Rosalinda away, leaving Anthony to continue his quiet observation. His phone buzzed with an email notification, probably from his soon-to-be former workplace. He ignored it. 6 months ago, Anthony's measure of success had been financial growth, investment returns, client acquisition. Now, success looked like Mrs. Petrovich showing photos of her great-grandchildren to Mr. Goldstein, like David helping Mr. Chen cut his meat because arthritis made it difficult, like Valentina teaching Mrs. Vasquez how to use a smartphone to video call her daughter in California. As he moved to help serve dessert, Anthony caught sight of his reflection in the window. He looked different somehow, less tense, more present. The unexpected detour his life had taken when he came home early that day had led him exactly where he needed to be, and he wouldn't trade it for all the successful investments in the world.